So we're wrapping up our module on collars here, and we're going to talk about roll collars, the Peter Pan collar. In your textbook, we're in chapter 10. This is on page 186 through 187. And the roll collar is interesting because what we're going to need to do is you need to, just like our earlier drafts of the collars, we'll be taking both our front and back bodice together in order to create these. But in this case, we actually need to line them up together. So we're going to be connecting a draft where we're drafting both our front bodice and our back bodice together. Now, with regards to a roll collar, so what we're doing is we're creating this shape right here where it's more rounded. And what you have to play with is the amount of overlap that we want at the shoulder. So the more your pattern pieces, and what I mean by overlap is when we connect this and the more we overlap our shoulder pieces, the wider the exterior of our collar is going to get. When we go this way, where our stay as true to the natural shoulder as possible, the flatter, if we were to just follow this line 100%, it would get. So this is where your design actually comes into play. I'm going to draft this a couple different ways so you can see what I'm talking about. Because even though our Peter Pan collar is round, it can still be pointed like a sailor. So we're going to show you in the draft, in this first example here, I'm going to just trace these off as is where they're matching up with one another. So in this particular case, we want to align the necklines as much as possible. Excuse me. That's where the good old weights come in handy. Center front, center back. Here's my shoulder. I want to know where my shoulder is, and I want to know where my midpoint shoulder is, because you want to be conscious of how big are you making this collar. How wide is it going to be? And we'll talk about some other collars as well. But for your exercise in your notebook, the one that you'll be building is this Peter Pan collar. So make a note, this is your front, and this is your back, so that you know what you're dealing with. Now, the first thing that you want to do is identify how long do we want this collar to be at the center back. Again, this is a design detail, so I'm going to make this particular collar 3 inches long at my center back. I want to determine how wide I want it to be at my shoulder. So I'm going to maintain my length, same in this particular design. I would like to maintain the same length at my shoulder. But these are just design details. As you change these variables, that's what makes the design different. And then in this particular detail, I want it to be at least 2 inches long as it's coming into the neckline before it hits that, and then come to about 3 inches here. So you're kind of basically creating the curve of what you want that to be, and then drafting my 3 inches from this neck, drafting evenly my 3 inches from this neck. This graph ruler is your best friend. Using this as a guide to pivot all the way around, you're following your neckline, basically. But we're doing that in this example. This could be wavy, this could be, just know that the wavier you get, the more difficult it might be to maintain in a production scenario. If you were to do 1,000 pieces of a wavy style line, you better have couture sewers who are going to be able to ensure that the same level of execution is done for all 1,000 pieces, and that your customer is willing to pay for that level of execution. So that is your basic Peter Pan collar. It follows the true collar line. Again, when you go to draft your facing, we'd follow the true facing here of the neckline, and that the under collar would be 1/8 of an inch smaller. But let's say we want to have more overlap. So I'm going to come back and we're going to do a version with more overlap. In which case, I'm going to leave my center front stable, and I'm going to drop, let's drop the back. We're going to pivot this so that you're leaving your back hooked up. But now I'll use a different color so you can see how it's changing the design line. So now if I wanted to do the same style line, 3 inches, maybe I want my front to be pointy. And you can see how I'm going to blend 3 inches, 3 inches. And if I blend this back, 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches, it begins to change the design. We have a pointed one, or let's try one that's got a lot of overlap. So you continue to play around with these. So for your homework exercise, you're going to do 2 versions of this, one with a point and one that's rounded. And you're going to play around with variations of the amount of overlap to create a different kinds of style line. You can see here, the grain line is always going to follow the center back. So this is always going to be what your grain line is. And the wider you become, you may need a seam here at the center back, whereas the other ones were cut on the fold. This may actually need to be 2 pieces. And that is how we deal with roll collars. The more overlap you have, the broader that exterior edge is going to be.